Welcome to another 5-minute religious education recap video. We're on the exam board Eduqas. We are exploring the foundational Catholic theology paper. We are on the unit of origins and meanings. And today's session is going to look at evolution and Genesis creation. And hopefully by the end of the day, you'll be able to explain the impact of evolution on Genesis creation. So starting off then, we'll do a bit of a recap, but according to the story of Genesis in the Bible, some of the key beliefs you can pull out of it are that God made everything on earth in its final form. So we learn in those 7 days of creation that God creates things, and there they are, they're placed on the earth. We know that God is omnipotent. He is the only one with the power to be able to create all this, and he shows his power by creating through his words alone. We also know that God created the world to suit his creations. So he creates all of the land and the sea and the skies first, and then he starts to put the creatures into it. So the world is perfect for his creation. We know that God made everything from nothing. We've studied this in an earlier video with St. Augustine talking about creatio ex nihilo, but it says in the beginning there is nothing, and then God creates everything. We also know that God is omnibenevolent because he creates out of love, and all parts of his creation he takes time and he designs it carefully. So we find out that God is omnibenevolent. And finally, we know that God made man in his image. So according to that Genesis creation story, we find out that God has created man to reflect him. Now, thinking about evolution in Genesis then, when we look at Darwin's theory of evolution, it directly challenges some of these key ideas. Now, there are plenty of ways we can criticize this, but I'm just going to pluck out a few. If I take Genesis, that God made everything in its final form, well, actually, what evolution teaches us is that organisms are gradually changing. They're not in their final form. Therefore, God did not make all the animals in their final form on Earth like Genesis claims. And there's plenty of evidence to support and back that up through fossils and DNA. Secondly, Genesis says that God created the world to suit his creations. Well, we know that the environments are changing. All you have to do is look around. And the fact of the matter is that nature is constantly changing, and as a result the environment is changing. So therefore, Genesis claims that God created this environment and this world to suit his creations. Well, that isn't the case because the environment is constantly changing. Furthermore, God is omnibenevolent. Well, as Tennyson wrote in a poem, nature is red in tooth and claw. Now, we know from evolution that animals kill animals as part of the survival of the fittest process. Now, a loving God would not create a world where creatures are going to be ripping each other to shreds to survive. And that red in tooth and claw implies the blood that is in their teeth and claws. So it's a very brutal creation. That doesn't seem to reflect a good creation or a loving creation as mentioned in Genesis. Now, we can support this by looking at a couple of quotes. We're going to look at Richard Dawkins. Now, he's an evolutionary biologist and he's an opponent of religious explanations about creation. Now, what Richard Dawkins does, he argues that there is an overwhelming amount of empirical evidence which shows there is no designer God. What I mean by that phrase empirical is that he uses sense experience to look around at the world and say, what does the evidence show me? And he basically says that everything on Earth, it's clearly been created by a process of evolution, and the evidence supports this, not of this omnipotent, omniscient, transcendent being. And he says a couple of things. One is, why bother believing in something when there is not a shred of evidence? And when you stack it up, he says, evolution has evidence, such as fossils and DNA. What evidence does God have? Just a book, and that is only words, which have been passed down over thousands of years. Furthermore, he says, there is no positive reason to think that God does exist. However, he argues there's plenty of positive reasons to see why the process of evolution does exist. So he's a big critic of this idea of a designer God, and that's through him using empirical evidence and the scientific theory of evolution. Furthermore, Richard Dawkins, he actually argues that anyone who uses God as an explanation, they're simply being lazy. They're plugging gaps in their knowledge with a bad explanation because they don't want to look and explore for the answer. Now, he didn't come up with this theory, but you can use this as an argument. It's called a God of the gaps argument. It's quite simple, really. You use God as an excuse for gaps in your knowledge. So, I don't know how life got here, it was God. And Richard Dawkins says that's really lazy, when what you could do is study the world, study the universe, and actually find the evidence to find out the answer. So the God of the gaps is another criticism, and this shows how Genesis creation story, not true, and actually there is no creator God. Now finally, have a look down these key terms here. try and link these to the idea of evolution and these challenges between kind of evolution on Genesis. If you can do that, then you've been successful. If you want to push yourself a little bit further, then go for these exam style questions. Good luck, and thank you very much for listening.